In July 1945, a train pulled into Camp Beale, California, carrying 500 men who had spent 6 days and 5 nights getting there from Boston. They had already fought their war in Europe, and the army was moving them across the continent toward the one still going on in the Pacific. Somewhere in the middle of the country, the drinking water ran out, and the toilets stopped working. To lie flat, men pulled the backs off the seats and stretched out on what was left, and the ones who could not find room slept in the aisle on top of their luggage. What they said out loud when they climbed down had less to do with the ride than with something they had watched through the windows for most of a week, which was civilians going past them in air-conditioned Pullmans. And a rumor had been working its way down the length of the train, from car to car, that German prisoners of war were crossing the same country in Pullmans as well. The prisoners were real, and there were a great many of them. On the 13th of May 1943, the Axis armies in Tunisia surrendered, and something like 275,000 men passed into Allied hands within a few days, far more than North Africa could feed or guard or house. The answer was already floating off the coast. American freighters were going home in ballast after delivering war supplies, and the holds that had carried tanks and shells eastward began carrying Africa Corps veterans west. They came ashore at Camp Shanks in New York, at Norfolk, at Boston. Each man filled out a 3-page form covering his personal and medical history, his fingerprints, an inventory of everything in his pockets, and the circumstances of his capture as written on the tag still hanging from his tunic. His Zolt book, the 15-page booklet that every German soldier carried, was taken from him. He was sprayed with disinfectant and sent to the showers while his uniform went into a fumigation chamber, and he was photographed, and then he was put on a train. The train was the part nobody had prepared them for. Soldiers who had spent 3 years being shifted around Europe in boxcars found themselves sitting in modern upholstered coaches with guards posted at either end and a continent sliding past the glass. One of them set down what happened when the porter came through, and the passage has been quoted ever since. These modern upholstered coaches were a pleasant surprise to everyone, he wrote, and when the colored porter came through with coffee and sandwiches and offered them to us as though we were human beings, most of us forgot those anti-American feelings that had accumulated. The distances did something to them that the coaches had not. Germany can be crossed in a day, and the run from a pier in New York to a camp in Texas or Arizona took the better part of a week. So a certain number of the prisoners concluded that the Americans were driving the train in circles to make the country look larger than it really was. The towns came out to watch them arrive, and on the 4th of June 1943, the residents of Mahe, Texas, lined Railroad Street and stared while 1,850 veterans of the Africa Corps swung down from the railroad cars and formed up to march the 4 miles out to their camp. Mahe had 3,500 people living in it, and one of them, Val Horn, put the arithmetic plainly afterward. "Holy cow," he said, "we were a town of only 3,500, and we had just seen our population increased by 50%, and they were foreigners on top of it." Americans wrote letters about all of this, and they wrote a lot of them. Scores of indignant citizens went to civil and military authorities to complain about Italian prisoners being escorted to the opera in San Francisco, and about white-jacketed porters serving lunch to German prisoners as they rolled across the country in comfortable Pullman cars. One observer who watched a train go by came away scandalized, reporting that the Germans seemed to have a Pullman car all to themselves. The army's reasoning had very little to do with generosity. By the end of the war, close to 94,000 American servicemen were being held in Germany, and an officer of the Provost Marshal General's Prisoner of War Division told the protesters, in effect, that the United States intended to follow the rules to the letter precisely so that the enemy would not be handed even the semblance of an excuse to do otherwise with the men it was holding. The other half of the story was happening on the railroads themselves. Between 1940 and 1944, American passenger traffic climbed from 23 billion passenger miles to 96 billion, close to a 4-fold increase in 4 years. The railroads were running roughly 2,500 troop trains every month, And to do it, they were committing on average a quarter of all their coaches and half of all their Pullmans. From late 1943, the Pullman Standard Car Company built 2,400 troop sleepers under a government contract, 30 men to a car in 3-tier crosswise bunks, with a Pullman porter aboard and the linen changed daily. Sleeping cars for soldiers existed, in other words, and were being built as fast as the contracts allowed. There were never enough of them to go around, and which train a man ended up on depended on what equipment happened to be available on the day his orders came through. By the summer of 1945, that arithmetic had come apart. Germany had surrendered in May, the Pacific War had not ended, and entire divisions were being shifted from one ocean to the other, with something on the order of 21 million individual man moves still ahead, all of it sharing the same track with the freight that kept the war supplied. The men who arrived at Camp Beale complained loudly enough that it reached print. Time carried the story on the 16th of July 1945, and in the same paragraph it carried the Army's answer to the rumour, which was that prisoners of war rode in Pullmans only when they were certified as ill. Both halves of that argument were true, and they were true about different years. In 1943 and 1944, when the prisoner trains were crossing the country, the railroads still had decent passenger equipment to spare, and the prisoners rode in it. By the middle of 1945, the equipment was stretched past its limit, and the soldiers riding home from Europe were getting whatever was left, which is how 500 veterans came to spend 5 nights on the floor of a day coach. What changed after that was not about prisoners at all. On the 15th of July 1945, the Office of Defense Transportation, working with the War Department, barred civilians from sleeping car space on any journey shorter than 450 miles. The order came from Colonel Monroe Johnson, and it pried loose about 895 sleeping cars for the Army's use, so that the comfort actually taken away that summer belonged to the traveling public. Camp Beale, where those 500 men climbed down into the valley heat, had been holding German prisoners since March 1944. There were about 1,200 of them, most from Rommel's army in North Africa, quartered in 17 barracks with 4 mess halls, 6 storehouses, a canteen and a chapel, behind a tall wire fence with 2 guard towers and floodlights, and they were still there in July 1946. The Americans who came off that train after 5 nights in the Isle were walking onto a post where the enemy had been living for 16 months.